10:01. We'll start the meeting. This is Friday, June 6th, 2025, Development Review Committee meeting for the conceptual site plans submitted by McCarty Engineering on behalf of Harbor Classic Homes LLC. Is anyone recording today's meeting? I see no mention of recording, so I'll waive that. Move on to reading of the minutes from April 11th, 2025. I hear a motion to waive the reading.
To accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Moving on to the conceptual site plan for Harbor Classic Homes. I will pass it off to Wesley Fliss from McCarty Engineering to present the plans.
So again, record Wesley Fliss with McCarty Engineering here to represent Harbor Classic Homes. Harbor Classic has been trying to develop this piece of property for about 4 years, maybe 5 years now, since the initial application from the town for a cluster open space residential subdivision with single-family houses. We went through, at that point, the building inspector pushed us toward the zoning board of appeals for access for that type of development. We went through the zoning board of appeals. There was an approval and a denial of the two different permits in front of the ZBA. There was a court case that lasted quite a while. We got remanded back to the ZBA that finally the ZBA approved for both variances. After that happened, we went in front of the planning board almost actually 2 years ago now. I was looking at my original plans that I had done. They were dated July 2023. And so we went in front of the planning board with a number of conceptual layout plans for a open space residential plan, cluster housing, 76 single-family lots. We were met with a lot of negative feedback from the board, and obviously the neighbors, which we expect from the neighbors. But the planning board, it was quite the, I would say 6 months of going back and forth with the planning board, plan after plan after plan, never getting to somewhere that we could come to some common ground. After that, the developers tabled it for a little bit. Then they met with the mayor and a couple of the city councilors that dealt with this area of the city. They were directed or pushed toward doing senior housing. The thought here is to do senior housing to have less impact, obviously, on the schools and the impact of the city services. Also to allow other housing for the residents of the city. Hope that we get residents of the city to move here, and that houses, single-family houses in the city, open up for them. Was really what the mayor was thinking of doing this type of project. We obviously are aware of the other senior housing project that's going on with the Denels over near the schools. That's almost done, I believe. I think he's close to being done with that project. But I think that was a similar thought there, right? Is to provide senior housing for the residents such that the existing single houses free up. The Harbor Classic Homes actually is currently developing another piece of property in Rutland, something very similar to this, where they're doing senior housing. They have 142 units there. And so what they're taking from their experience developing that and trying to create a development here in Gardner on this piece of property in the similar type of units that they're end up building over there, because they're seeing what the market is dictating for in this type of units. The single-story living, but the amenities that people are looking for, right? A little different model than that's currently going on up at near the school over on the 101 over there, right? So the Denels are building with their smaller single-family homes. They wanted to do that. Still very big units, good size footprints, but it's all single-story living for them. There is the option to have basements on these. I know in the Rutland project they're doing right now, they do have a lot of basements on most of the units. Their initial thought was to do slab and grade, but they're still getting feedback that people still want basements to have storage. Because that was like one of the issues that I think the Denels are running into, right? It's a slab on grade, smaller piece of smaller units. They're running out of storage, right? When you move to a different home, you do have stuff coming with you, right? So that's one of the thoughts they're having here, is still to have basements as an option. They're not going to throw those out the window right now. So the piece of property we're looking at is about a little over 89 acres. A very small piece of the property is in single-family residential. Most of the frontage, or all the frontage, is in general residential. And then the remaining portion, really the bigger piece of the property, is in rural residential. Under the zoning, the senior housing for two-family is allowed, permissible in the single family, which we are really not in, other than for a small portion of the road and grading for the roadway. And then special permit through the planning board, on the other two districts being the general residential and the rural residential, right? So we understand that we have to go through that process as we get a little further along, but we want to have this meeting in a conceptual manner with the development review board, and then also with the planning board. We'll meet with them on Tuesday night. The attorney for the project and the developer will be there Tuesday night to present the same plan that you see in front of you tonight to the planning board, and have conversations with them to see what kind of feedback we can give them the planning board this time around. So what we're looking at is 180 units out here in 90 duplexes. We tried following a similar roadway layout or similar model that our last conceptual plan that we had for the single family that really was directed by the planning board and the planner at that time. There were some previous plans done, I would say almost 20 years ago, that they really liked the layout of it, and so we've tried to follow along that same layout, knowing that the planning board at least like the layout of the streets and having a little bit of an open space in between, having that green space in between the units and not everything on top of each other. Some of the iterations that we had shown them in the past, and the single family layout did compress everything more to the middle, but they didn't like the more compressed layout, and so they were looking for some green space in between. The layout you see in front of you here, we're obviously trying to protect the wetlands. We're not showing any wetland filling. We're trying to respect, obviously, the 30-foot no-touch zone that the city has, and also not having any impervious area within the 60 feet of the wetlands. I do anticipate, at least with regards to the layout that you see in front of you today, having some grade within that 30 to 60-foot zone on some of the lots in the upper portion here, Justin, right? And maybe a little bit in the corner there, depending where the drainage ends up. I know we do have I think it's a small portion of floodplain that comes onto the property in the corner, but we're well away from all that. And then we're obviously close to the reservoir on the upper right-hand corner, right? So I don't know if we call it a reservoir, but so we try to keep everything away from that upper right-hand corner too, right? And obviously some wetlands that are protecting that upper right-hand corner. So one of the iterations that we showed, we did show a couple units in there, but we thought it would be best just to kind of move those out of there and kind of keep that buffer between the natural resource in that upper right-hand corner and the development. Our two options for two access points, obviously one would be on Century Way, around the bend, and the other one on Clark Street between the Triconians and Poirier's property. During our previous conversations with the planning board, we did have some back and forth with the abutters about if we had proper access there, and there was a lot of legal paperwork that went back and forth, and showed that we do have access on Clark Street, because there was some disagreement about who owned that piece of property, but all the digits came back as being Harbor Classic owned that and bought that property, and that was excluded from the sale of some of the property, that from the bigger piece of property, and those A&R lots are done. We do show actually 50, I believe it's a 50-foot offset around the entire property, where the zoning I think is called for 30-foot offset. We were trying to keep a 50-foot offset just to keep a little more buffer to the residents on Century Way, knowing that that's what was a sensitive area. A little different this time around, where last time it was a single-family lot, we were doing actual lots, and so actually before we were giving property to the butters, now it's going to be a condo association, so it's all going to stay under the association. And the remaining land will all stay as open space. We are proposing 5 roads. The road that connects Clark Street, Century Way, is 2,300 and 3,500 feet in length. The secondary longer cul-de-sac here is about 2,200 linear feet of roadway. Then we have some smaller other little roads where we have this road which is 300 feet. This road here is 300 feet, and we have the cul-de-sac, the longer cul-de-sac which is 570 feet, and the smaller cul-de-sac which is 220 feet. We are following with regards to the regulations for subdivision control law, with regards to the width of the road and sidewalks and so forth, even though we're not doing subdivision roads. Because of the number of units, we're still going to have 24-foot wide pavement width. We'll have the berm, we'll have the grass strip there between that and the sidewalk, and then we'll have, the parking will be in front of the units. Each unit will have their own garage. There'll be enough parking for each of the units. One of the things we also show as part of this, and I know, one of the things that Dave was mentioning early on was the projects down in Florida, and how they all have their own community centers, and similar to what these guys are doing in Rutland, they do have their own community center centrally located within the development. And so like I said, they're kind of following along the same footprints that they were looking at in Rutland, where, like I said, there were 142 there, and they're a similar size community center, and that's what they're looking at, demand on what the community center would be, and that's what they come back as the size that is needed for the size of the community center. It's 3,000 square feet. We do show the driveway at the community center, and some parking around the community center. We have some room there if we need to expand parking, if they feel that they need more parking. One of the things I don't show on the plan, but we will be including as we get going on this, is we will show trails throughout here. That was some of the conversation that we had with the planning board on the open space project, was to have some walking trails out here. We will have walking trails. I know there's a fair amount of open space that the North County Land Trust owns, and I think the city turned, is it the Land Trust finally get the cul-de-sac that didn't get built? Is that who bought that? Is that?
In North County.
Right, North County finally bought that cul-de-sac, so I know that was some conversation there to tie into the trails as best we can that are adjacent to this, to expand onto the trail system, and so that is something that we will do as we get further along in the design process. But our thought now is, and really from the planning board standpoint, knowing the pushback that we got from them, is to get a plan in front of them with what we're looking at for a layout and number of units, because that was really the big argument last time, was the layout and the density and the impact of the city in the neighborhood, right? And so we didn't get too much further into the nitty-gritty about the open space and what's going to happen with the trails and how they're going to be laid out, because until we get a layout of the roads and the units and stuff like that that is agreeable by the planning board, we kind of see that as all a waste at this point to, get too much into the details until we can have a number of units and the number of roadways that we should have out here. But we obviously want to get from the board, obviously in the DPW, we want to tie into the municipal sewer, we want to tie into municipal water. We'll have a drainage system out here, consistent catch basins and detention basins. Like I said, it's going to be an association. It's going to be a private development, so they'll own the driveways and the infrastructure within the development. We're well aware that Century Way was just repaved last year.
That's one of our notes.
So, and by the time we saw it, and I was telling my clients, give you guys a call, because I knew it was getting paved in like 2 weeks, and they never got hold of you in time to try to get stuff off the road. And so they are well aware that it's a 5-year moratorium. My brother and I actually talked about this right after it got paved, and that I told them your process with regards to, because you paved Century Way, but we also know there's sewer also in Clark Street, so this isn't going to happen this year, obviously construction-wise. I don't see this happening next year construction-wise. By the time all the permits get in hand and by the time these guys get moving out here to construct it, this is probably a couple of years out is my guess. We could phase it in a manner that we can tie into the Clark Street sewer first, get some of that development done, and then by that point, hopefully the 5 years is up and we can tie into the sewer and Century Way. And
It's just a matter of going in front of,
and that's what Ross explained to me, how the process going in front of the consent committee, right, and getting that approved. And,
it's not a huge deal.
yep, and so when we get to that point, hopefully we get to that point on the project that we can have those conversations about and go get in front of that committee, but we are aware of those issues. Obviously, the intent is to loop the water between the 2 streets and then loop it as much as we can, and then here we have a couple dead ends with the cul-de-sacs, but we loop the water as much as we can to obviously keep with water quality. Once the development's built out, especially with this number of units, the water's going to be flowing out here, right? So I know the demand's a little less with over 55 and the number of people out here, but it's still going to be enough to, I think the water quality shouldn't be an issue. But those are some of the things that we want to work out with you as we go on further down the road. I hope that, because it's an association, a condo association, that obviously you guys don't have to, not having to take any stormwater, I hope that takes care of some of the burden. You guys have to have a peer review, make sure it's done correctly and installed correctly. At least the maintenance of a lot of that doesn't come on the city, right, with a development of this kind. So those are the things that we were thinking of, at least of a benefit of this type of project instead of the single family development.
One of the huge issues I see on this is the road width. You're gonna have snow storage in the winter. You got a 26-foot wide road. You can't even park a car in the road. So And our city ordinance requires a 28, so I know you're looking at subdivision, but our ordinance requires 28. So if they're in a snowstorm, they're gonna pull their cars out, they're gonna park the street. If there's an emergency,
Yep.
we're not getting,
And that's fine, and that's why, like I said, I was going by the subdivision, I didn't know that the ordinance was different, and that's fine.
One of the things to that point too, Wes,
Yeah.
is if I'm reading this correctly in the zoning, that there's one guest space required for every 3 units.
Yeah, and that was something that we were gonna talk to them about, because I think we've done some other senior housing proposals in town, but they're more of assisted living complexes where, like, I can understand about 1 to 3 units, so that's what we're gonna talk to the planning board, to see how many spaces they really would want, I guess, not the.
Well, what I see here is because of the roadway width and, assuming 1 parking space in the garage, 1 in the driveway, typically you have some people who don't use the garage, they park on the street, or they have guests. So there's not a lot of space for parking outside of the driveway. So, in my head, I see sprinkled around the development of a few spaces here and there, wherever you can grab some.
And I guess that's where, to be honest with you, is when we get from the planning board, I'm sure there's gonna be a negotiation about the number of units, right? And so, when we get to the number of units, then we'll have the number of guest spaces that we're gonna need. If it's 60 right now, it's 60.
Yeah.
If it gets down to 50, say, just,
Yeah.
right, whatever the number gets to, then we can start sprinkling around where we're gonna need them.
Yeah.
And we can start making those common parking lots where we need to have the visitor parking lots.
I mean, I'm not pushing for more impervious area, but for the zoning.
And that was the concern I had, I didn't wanna make a parking lot of 60 spaces that doesn't get used either, right? So I think we gotta be smart about where this goes, and so there is some wiggle room, that's why I said we're in a conceptual stage for a reason let's get these things on the table and find out what we need and what we don't need, right, so.
And just speaking on behalf of, I know Fire isn't here today, but just doing some research there, for bumper swing clearance for 20-inch bumpers, extended bumpers is 40 feet, 40 feet 9 inches. So I have a copy of if you wanna.
Yeah, and so when we would submit, when we would submit some of the plans, we'll show them that they can get in and around with their fire trucks. Obviously, the cul-de-sac is to the size that the city requires. It's big enough to handle the fire trucks swinging it around. The entrances are designed, the intersections are designed to the city requirements.
Yeah, but to the point that Dane makes, the roads aren't wide enough, especially in some of these tighter turns, in order to get emergency EMS vehicles through. There are a couple cul-de-sacs in order, especially ones that, I think they're all 50-foot pavement radiuses for turning there, but I'm just definitely worried about some of the turns and some of these other ways in terms of getting EMS vehicles through there, inclusive of the community center as well.
And that's fine, and I didn't show a connection for that out to the other street, but we can show a connection, the secondary access out there. Again, when we do this, we try limiting pavement as much as we can, but if we need to get up to 20 feet and to meet the city requirements, that's what we have to do. We're not gonna argue about the width of the road, and we'll make sure that we provide that turning movement sketch so that we can show the fire department that we can handle their largest vehicle. That's easy enough.
as far as the water and sewer, I'm gonna ask, we're gonna have to look at the water demand and the sewer capacity.
You're
We're gonna have to, we'll submit a proposal from Taylor Howard, who was our hydraulic, and take a look at that for water and sewer.
And I know that's what I was gonna ask you too, is I know you guys had done a decent amount of improvements already right to the sewer system, and I know talking to you in the past about some of the other projects we were trying to do, that was always a concern, right, with the sewer capacity, so.
And this goes right under Parker's Pond, which is
Which I still have your old plan that you shared, right, and that's what I remember seeing all the red on that plan, right, because.
I know you've already said that, the conversation about how many units this will eventually be will be a conversation for the planning board. Keeping in mind that, I don't think most of the abutters, they're not gonna bite for the way that it's currently presented.
They're not gonna be happy with more than 5, I mean, let's.
But, we have to go with them with the numbers in terms of traffic, proposed traffic, and, they're all single-family owned homes that are going to be largely affected by it on Century Way. You know, so the amount of traffic proposed, you know, is really gonna be
Yeah, that's,
mindful when if we were to get to public hearings, for there, cause, you know, as it is now, I know we're within the amount of lot coverage in terms of the amount of proposed density of less than 4.
yeah, we're half of the density, and that's, and I know, we've had that argument, the planning board is, it's not only single family, it's multifamily over there too, right? So it's a mix of everything over there. We had this conversation about the density of the existing lots over there too with the planning board. Density versus all the area in that adjacent Century Way project. So
Yeah.
this is not necessarily new to us with regards to what their issues are gonna be.
Yeah.
And so that we're ready to have that conversation on Monday with them, we expect some pushback from them.
Yeah, I mean, just because, you know, the fact that we can't take the wetlands area we take it into account in terms of the total area. It's every square footage that could have units put into it has been, you know, we have a green space in the middle, but it's all the available area that could be built upon, you know, is being built upon. You know, we have to, you know, by ordinance take into all the area that we can't, which is a lot of wetlands. You know, it takes up a good portion of the area. You know, but you know, if this were to go in front of planning board, like as it is now, as in terms of a preliminary plan, like outside of conceptual,
It won't fly.
Well, and I can tell you we meet all the requirements about
Yeah.
open space, percent of
Yep.
wetlands.
Yep.
We meet all those numbers, well exceed those numbers.
Yeah.
We are half the density out here.
Yeah,
We understand that, yes, the neighbors aren't gonna be happy with anything. They weren't happy with single family houses, which would have been better for their property value.
Mhm.
The houses that were being proposed, that they were bigger than the houses that are existing out on Century Way.
Mhm.
We still got feedback that was negative, because they don't want development behind their property, nobody does. Doesn't matter what town we're in and what neighborhood we're in, nobody wants development behind their property, we understand that.
Nobody wants a sludge landfill either.
Well, listen, and that's, thank goodness you guys are still in front of the city right now, because we'll be second worst in the list. I will say this, we did have a traffic report already done for the other project.
Mhm.
Traffic report came back fine.
Yeah.
We'll update that as we get going with this. Clark Street is, I mean, and I know there are a couple areas along Clark Street that site distance may be an issue further down the street, but at least in this area, even on Century Way, like it came back that the traffic impact for the prior development wasn't an issue.
Mhm.
I think there was some minor signage that really was the recommendations of that. So we've already ahead of the game with regards to the traffic analysis, we've already done some of that work, and we will update it as we get going with this development, once we get to a number that, is agreeable to everybody in the, you know, that's doing this, right, the planning board and the applicant, right, so. But that's the thought there, right, is to
Yeah.
still update that, but they're fully aware that traffic's gonna, you know, at least concern of the butters.
Yeah.
And I will tell you is, when we were in front of them before, they mentioned traffic a little bit, but they were just against the project. Like, it was basically, most of the conversation, they didn't want anything going on out there. And from the wetland standpoint, we're trying to stay away from wetlands as best as we can with this. That's the whole point of any of these projects, being this or the open spaces, it's to protect the wetlands, and that's what we're trying to do, is protect the wetlands as part of this project, so. We're not showing crossings, we're not, you know, there's no filling out here, nothing like that. We're trying to respect the 30-foot and 60-foot, but still accomplish a development that provides the city with housing. Which is the mayor's biggest point, is he's trying to provide housing, right? And this is why he pushed the developers for this type of development.
Are these gonna be sold or leased?
They'll be sold. So each
Sold.
unit will be sold, yep.
But still under the condo association.
They'll all have, so it'll be.
It's senior housing, so like, I
So
mean,
if
you
it's,
can't leave.
if it's this setting, it's 1 out of 180,
Yeah.
they all own the, right, they all have a part of the association. And that's what they're doing around, and so, you know, if, the project's under construction, but you can kind of see some of the units that are being out there, being built up there, that actually does, it's a little tighter, because they didn't have the option, they had a lot more environmental restrictions out there. It's the old state hospital that used to be in Rutland, they tore down the town's redevelopment, that's what they're doing as student housing out there. Same type of units though, same thought, where it's a single story living. And they've had a ton of offers on the units, and they're selling for a lot more money than I expect these to be selling for, because it's a little closer to Worcester and kind of draws a different demographic in Rutland, right? But but you can, more than willing to take a ride out there, because it's under construction, so it's a little tougher to see, because there's not a lot of grass growing right now.
Yeah, you have to go through the gate and go further in.
Well, they've only built the first, I wanna say 12 units better up, I think, as you drive, so you can get in, there's no gate up into the development, so you can get into the development, but I wanna say it's the first 12 or so units are up, and so. The only thing that delayed that is National Grid. They had to wait a year for National Grid to get them electricity up there.
What's new?
So they would have already had probably 20 to 25 units up and running, but they literally had to wait for National Grid, so.
I think you're losing a lot of units. If you make a 28-foot wide road, add your drainage, add snow storage, we haven't even talked about that, there's no place to put snow here.
Yeah,
You're,
it's too congested.
yeah, you're taking a lot of these units out of here.
I can assure you the planning board will buy it as presented right now.
Yeah, no, like I said, they're anticipating pushback from the planning board.
You can't have a 24-foot road.
Oh, yeah,
You're having emergency responses.
You'd have to have no parking.
we're not debating the 24 and 28. We'll give you the 28. And if the 28 requires us reducing the number of units, that's what happens. It's,
Yeah.
What-
Even if they say no parking during a snowstorm, they're gonna pull out in the street and clean their lawn, so.
Yeah, well, you're not plowing this, so at least there's that.
But emergency vehicles get to
Yeah.
so.
What are they gonna do with trash and recycling?
they haven't, I'm not sure what they're doing. I'll ask what they're doing.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
ask.
a private site, I don't think the city,
You know, if it's owned by a condo association, they would be handling it. You can't leave
Yeah.
senior housing to,
so I don't know if you'll need dumpster storage
Yeah.
areas. type
So
of
I
thing.
think in the Rutland one that they're doing individual totes, but I'll ask them.
So they're hiring private contractor
But I'll double check. So the developer, he will be at the meeting on Tuesday, but I'll make sure but I'll ask him.
to, yeah, I mean, I'm just picturing all the
Nope.
wing bins
Yeah, nope.
out on the curb,
Yeah. And
which is fine, but I don't think the city, I don't know how that works.
if they pay their trash fee,
Yeah,
like everybody else does, like, right, we all.
yeah, because how are you gonna meter this with a master meter?
No, the individual meters for
I
each
each unit.
unit.
That's the,
Yeah, that's true, that's how.
cause they all have their own service, right, and,
Yeah, separate water and sewer.
yeah. So they get their own bill, right, and so it would have their own, right, I get my water sewer bill, it has a trash bill with it, so.
Yeah, do you collect trash on Pinewood Drive?
I believe so, yeah.
I mean, one more reason to have the road wired, but yeah.
And that's not,
Yeah.
like, I'm not, this is
But I
why
also
we're
think I think at the very beginning, isn't there a dumpster unit on the side? I have to look. Mailboxes, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know they had to work with the post office on the other project. On the mailbox. They actually, I think they did the mailbox on that one at the community center. I think that was what the resell team thing was on that.
Mailboxes at the communities.
They had to put a central mailbox, pad out at the, behind the parking space in the community center. And so you would just come up, pull out the parking space, get your mail, and then go back, or golf carts if people have golf carts.
That would be like having a post office box.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, and we do the same thing out on,
They do it on Pinewood Drive.
Danelle's development, they have a central
Yeah.
mail.
That's something we added actually.
But have you thought of a golf cart? Making just a wider sidewalks for golf cart use?
I don't know if that, I'll ask them if they're starting to see that, I'll ask if they've seen that demand, I'll ask them.
Yeah.
I'll ask that question. Well, I will say, it's funny you say that because the Harbor Classic, there's like 4 parties that we deal with, and the senior member, which is Jim Adams, I'm sure you know Jim from Leominster, he did some of the stuff over near Filipino, across the street there. So he lives in Florida, he develops down in Florida, and so a lot of the conversations we have, well, this is what we do in Florida, this is what, because he sees them all, right, so this is what it is. So I'll ask the question
I
during
mean,
the
they're
conversation.
driving down, they're playing cards instead of driving cars, it's gonna reduce parking on the street as well,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, I'll ask the question.
and there won't be any, as far as you're concerned and that your clients have discussed, there's no intent to ever have the roadways
No.
taken by the city?
No. So the problem is if we make it a roadway, then we have a process.
Well, yeah.
Then we have to make it public, we have to do it right away.
Yeah,
You still actually need a 50-foot right of way according to the ordinance. That's another thing. If you look up 567-8, it's in the city specs, which is adhered. They adapt the city specifications, it's in there. So whether you waive that or, I don't know how you do
For the senior housing?
that. In our city specifications,
Yeah.
which is under the city code,
Yeah.
in the specs, they call for a 50-foot right of way and a 28-foot right
20
of way.
foot, okay. Alright. Well, that's,
Can't change that.
I don't think so,
it's not a street though, it's just a driveway in the development.
right,
but that's a street. You're driving a vehicle, it's a public way.
it's not a public way,
It's a driveway.
It's a driveway.
It's a driveway.
it's a driveway.
We can, this could be discussed at another.
Well, if it's same
Driveway,
thing,
is it a common driveway? You can
Well,
only have two houses on a common driveway?
well, that was in place when you were around, is the one, what I think it was a Kylie Court, was a Kylie Way behind Anthony's Liquors.
Yes, a little cul-de-sac,
There's
yeah.
no right of way, right, but that's a condo development, and then the one over to you guys that,
I don't know when this ordinance was adopted though. I have to look. Might have been because of Kylie's way that ordinance was changed, but we'll look. It's in there, I know.
alright, well, I'll take a look at it, so.
So the resource areas, were those extracted or were those thoroughly delineated?
Thoroughly delineated.
Okay, thoroughly delineated, okay, yeah.
So that was actually one of the conversations I've been having with these guys about, having them just do an NRED
Okay,
sooner than later.
okay,
Just so we have it in place, so we can have you walk it and.
see,
Yes,
yeah,
yep.
yeah,
Cause we actually did a site walk with the planning board 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago now.
okay,
And then, at that time, the agent at the time came up with us too.
okay.
And that was one thing she recommended to them was to do the,
The NRAD,
NRED, right, just to
yeah,
solidify it, so we know when we do the definitive plan.
yeah, and obviously I have to take, some of the things that I see on the map with, a grain of salt, because, but, from what I see out of some of the state mapping software, it shows, the center point of some of these wetlands, especially the northeastern corner, it shows them as potentially being, streams or tributaries to Wilder Brook or associated with.
Yeah, there was no, it might have been an in stream, but not a.
Okay, but not a perennial, okay, so
If
there's.
you look at the GIS map, right, there's no dark blue lines out here, there's, so I
Right.
think that, and that's why they show it, it's
Yeah, cause, obviously that makes a big difference because, that changes from, just regular BZ to riverfront area kind of thing, and then you have to do a completely new calculation. The other thing that I found was there's potential CP polygon on the puzzle part right over here kind of thing. I might have to do some research to figure out if we could do,
so I know.
if we could potentially do another sidewalk where we could potentially kind of figure that out.
Yeah, so Mary Ann, that flag one's out here,
Okay.
so she'll be the one that should be happy to walk the property, and now, especially now, right?
That's not what I did,
Right.
no, absolutely.
So yeah, that's what I actually wanted,
the intention?
I was supposed to have a conference call with these guys early next week, so I was gonna take the notes from the meeting from today, and then also that was part of one of our items on the list is talk about an MRAD.
Okay.
Get that in the process, so
Okay.
I will tell them that, we're better off just doing that and then.
Yeah.
Right, and then there's no surprises. And what was this section over here, right, you're saying that the.
Yeah, it's probably right where the potential CVP is, so potential CVP. Right about where you see the concave portion of
Oh, yeah.
that puzzle piece, it's probably about maybe like 50, 60 feet up.
We should be back in a year then, I think, right?
So when the polygon starts,
Where like in the,
yeah,
oh, that is, that's probably right in here, yeah, okay.
yep, yeah, just want to get a verification on whether or not that's actually there or not, kind of thing.
Yeah.
don't know, I mean, I think there's lots of stuff that will come up during the course of, design and permit review,
Yes,
but,
yeah,
looping water, I think interior, the cul-de-sacs over here, just so that, you can reduce the dead end there.
and that's,
I don't know.
that color, the little cul-de-sac may be gone when we're all said and done, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's-
and
yeah.
so what I would say is, once we get to, and the planning board will tell us differently, Jason, hopefully you can help us direct this to, is, once we get to, I guess, a number that works for everybody, and whatever that number is, and a layout that works for everybody, we'd like to submit a preliminary plan with a special permit, which is for the senior housing, just to be able to say that we have the special permit before we do a definitive plan. Because if we don't get the special permit, we'd waste a ton of money doing a full design. And if, once that special permit is approved, then we could at least say, here's our approved layout. I can go sit down with Rob and Dane and say, okay, what do you want the water and the sewer, and, this is what we're looking at, what do you want any additions to it, and we can have those conversations before we come back with a site plan approval, application for that project. I hate to do a full design plan and not get a special permit, right, with a definitive site plan approval.
Yeah, you don't wanna waste your time.
Correct. And just knowing how everything's gone to this date, and like I said, we're at 4 years, and we don't have anything, right? So I don't wanna keep wasting money to get somewhere that they can't get approved, so I'd rather have positive conversations and then get to something that everybody can stay behind.
Yeah, you guys will make a presentation on Tuesday to the rest of the planning board.
Yeah, and that's so that,
We'll discuss.
and I'm sure it's gonna be density, right? It's gonna be density. And that's fine, Attorney Campabas will be there to present the plan, and the client's gonna be there also, so two of them will be there, and they've been there through the whole thing from day one with the building inspector, so they have all the history of the project, so they're gonna be, and they're expecting to have that conversation, so.
Okay.
In the meantime, we're gonna have a conference call with them, and I'll go over all the items that came up today, just so they're aware of some of these items.
Okay.
And then hopefully after Tuesday, we have a better direction of where we should go, so. Okay.
Any other comments from anyone else?
All my concerns have been addressed.
Alright. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Appreciate your time, guys.
Time is 10:38.